Today's daf yomi is Sanhedrin Sadi Gimel, Sanhedrin 93. Today's daf is dedicated for a shmir for the Chayalim. That's all for the Yeshuim. Yeshua for Amit Shalom States Torah. We'll start on the top of 93a. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Gedolim Tzadikim Yoseri Malachi Ashar. So Rabbi Yochanan taught that righteous people are even greater than angels. How do we know that righteous people are greater than angels? Because it says that when Nebuchadnezzar was looking, he says, "Anev Amer Hana Anani Chazi Govern Arba Sharian Malachim Begon Nora V'Chaval Elisa Bahon Ve Rave Di Via Dame Lubarawain." And he looked into the fiery furnace. He said, "I see four men." And the fourth person looks like an angel. So it means that the first three who had more prominence, it's Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and they were tzaddikim. So tzaddik is even better than an angel. Amar Rabbi Tachon Bar Chanilai v'Shah sheyatzu Hananiah, Mishael, v'Azariah mikiv shenei eish ba'u kolumos ha'olam v'tapu l'sonei and Shal Yisrael. When Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah survived the fiery furnace, the enemies of the Jews came and slapped the Jews in the face. You guys have a God like this, and you bow down to an angel. Immediately they started to say, it says, they immediately start to say, who started either Bnei Yisrael or Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah start to say, to you is righteousness, and to us is boshas upon him. We are humble. What does it mean that God says in Shir Hashirim, Tamar, I said I will climb up a palm tree, I'll grab a hold of the branches. Tamar, I said, Yisrael, I thought the Jewish people would be all tzaddikim. But then it says, but now all I have is just one branch of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Rabbi Yochanan, what does it mean? He says, I saw at night, and there was a man riding on a red horse, and he was standing amongst the myrtles in the depth. What does that mean? Because God wanted to destroy the whole world, to turn into night. Who is this quote unquote man writing? That refers to God. It says Hashem Ish. Hashem is called an Ish of war. Hashem Shemo. Al Sus Adom Bikesh HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ha'afochas Ha'olam. On a red horse, what does that mean? That God sought to destroy the world. Kula Wadam. Red refers to blood. That's why some say we drink red wine at the Seder. Remind us of the dam. Once God saw Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and Niskara died to decide not to destroy the world. As it says, made ben Adasim Asher Mitzula. The word Adas refers to tzaddikim, as we just read. It says in the pasuk in Book of Esther, Ve'ein Matzula Ella Babel. Matzula refers to Babylon. It says, Omer Matzula Charviv in Arosecha Ovish. Miyad, as it says, Tzula Charviv in Arosecha Ovish. Miyad Moleim Roges. So Nase Serukim Va'adumim Nasu Avanim. So those who are full of anger become less filled with anger, and Adumim become white. So Shrukim, Rashi says Tzivuim. So Rashi interprets it differently than what I said. I was basing it upon the context here. Rashi says it means the Shrukim Va'aduyim Nasu Avanim. That basically the filled with anger turns the red horse into multicolored, and then it turns it into white. There's a little bit of a different gear, so Yalkut Shimoni adds v'achakach nasu avon, and afterwards the red becomes the white. Amar Papa Shma Mina, and in fact the Radak is different gear, so then the Shechorim become the Shrukim. Okay, so you see why it's a little difficult gear stations. Amar Papa Shma Mina, we see from here Susyach Chivara Malil Chama, that a white horse is a good sign in a dream. Where did Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah go after they get out of the furnace? My wife is going to look down after that. So Amarav, Ayin Hara Mesas, that they ended up dying because all of Bnei Israel kept looking at them. The admiration and that gave them an ayin hara, and so as a result they died. Shmuel Amar Barok Tavu, they drowned in the saliva that the enemies of the nation spit against the Jews. Rabbi Yochanan's Amar Olar itself and Nasr Nashim, they went up to Israel, they married women, they had children. Mar says, Kitana, Rabbi Eliezer, Omer, Ba'ayin Aramesu, Rabbi Yeshua, Amar Barok Tavu, this is three opinions in the break. That's Shemana Yoshua HaKohen Gadol Atav V'Reacha Yoshvim Lefanecha Ki Anshem Ofos Hema. So it says to Zechariah in the book of Zechariah, there's a Kohen Gadol called Yoshua. It says, "Listen now, Yoshua, these people before you are men of wonders. Who are the people who wonder were done for? Avomer Zechananya Mishav Nazariah. Okay, but Daniel, so what happened to Daniel? Amarav Michra Nahara. So Rava Bitaveria. So first explanation, Rav says he went to dig some rivers into Tiberias. Shmuel Amar Asuye Bizra Daspas. They went to bring some seeds. He went to bring pigs from Alexandria in Egypt to Babel. Aini, is it really the case? Tanya told us Arofe Amar. I thought a pig can't leave. A cow and a pig can't leave Egypt. That whenever it leaves, they cut the mother because they don't want her to give birth outside of Egypt. So what happened? Zutari he brought little pigs, they didn't know, he smuggled them out. There are three who took part in this council of that Daniel shouldn't have been there when Hanan, Mishael, and Azariah were thrown into the fire. Who were the three? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Daniel, and Nebuchadnezzar. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Amar Nezel Daniel Me'acha. Let's get Daniel out of here. The Lo Emru Mischusei is not so. So we don't say that he was saved in his own merits, that they were saved in his merits. But Daniel Amar Ezel Me'acha. Daniel said, "I'll get out of here. The Lo Kayim Be Psile Olam Tisrufum Ba'ish." Because I don't want to fulfill through me the idea that they're going to throw their false gods into the fire. Nebuchadnezzar Amar, and Nebuchadnezzar said, Yazil Daniel he says, let's get Daniel out of here so that I don't want them to say that I burnt Daniel. And how do we know that they actually worship Daniel? They'll say, Badin. It says, Badin Malkan Nebuchadnezzar Nafal Payo Daniel Sagid. That Badin, I don't know, I think it means like the court or the group of Nebuchadnezzar fell on their faces and they worshiped Daniel. Good morning, Jeff. We're in 93A, around 20 lines from the bottom. Mara says, Klamar Hashem Tzvakos al Kesho, Achav ben Kolev el Tzidkiah ben Maasiyah Neviim. So there were these two false prophets at that time. Miksiv, and also says that they took a curse to all the exiles of Judah that were in Babylon. That you'll end up like these two false prophets. That they were burnt by Nebuchadnezzar in fire. Asher Sarfam, or the better word to use with Sarfam, why do you use Kalam? They became burnt. They became parched. They were asan kikoyos. That they ended up being like being singed in the fire. So what happened to them? Why? So why were they destroyed? Because they did a terrible thing, and they were adulterous with their friends' wives. My avod, what did these two false prophets do? So what they did was they went to the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, and Achav Amar Hashem Yishmi al Tzidkiah. He said, "Go be with Tzidkiah," and Tzidkiah said, "Amar Hashem Yishmi al Achav. Go be with Achav." So each were saying to be with their friend. She went and told her father, Amar their God hates this type of licentiousness. When they come back to you, send them to me. Yasl Gabava Shadartinu Gabi Abu. She sent them to her father. Amar, he said to them, Man Amochun, who told you to do this? Amar Kodesh Baruch who told us. Chananya Mishav and Azariah Shaltinu Gamli Yasser. He said, Nebuchadnezzar said, but I asked Chananya Mishav Azariah, they said it's prohibited. Amar not Nami Nevi Kavasayo. There he said, we're just like him. We're also prophets. So the done. God didn't tell him. He told us. Amaro Ana Baina. If the kinchu bat ketenu. So Nebuchadnezzar is very simple. I'll test you like I tested the three of them. Amrulai. So they said, I'll throw you in the furnace. So they said to him, Einun Tulasa Avan. Why not trade? So they're three, but we're only two. We don't have the same merit. So that's why. Amru Bachru Lachon. He said, you could choose for yourself, man, but you could choose whoever you want. Amr Yoshua Kohen Gadol. So they said, we want the high priest for Zechariah, whose name was Yoshua Kohen Gadol. Sabi Lacy Yoshua did not fish the Chuse. They said, let's bring Yoshua because he has so many merits, and he'll protect us. Achtienu, they took him and Shadinu Inu, and they threw him into the fire. Iku Yoshua Kohen Gadol Echruche Mane. So the corners of his garments burnt, but other than that, he was okay. As it says, Vayareni, as Yoshua Kohen Gadol, Melech Nei Malach Hashem. It says, and Zechariah said in the prophecy that we read as the Torah, actually more than once a year, we read it. We read it on Hanukkah, we read it Barosla. It says, Yoshua the Kohen Gadol, he showed me, God showed me Yoshua the Kohen Gadol standing before the angel of God. Uksiv Vayomer Hashem o Satan. And God says to the Satan, Yigar Hashem B'cha. God will rebuke you. Yadana de tzidkiyah. God says to the Satan, Yigar Hashem, I'm upset at you. Yadana de tzidkiyah at. How in my time, ahanya b'chapur tenura. So Nebuchadnezzar says to Yoshua, I know that you're righteous, it's tzadika at, but what's the reason why the fire burnt you a little? So Hananya, Mishael, and Azariah, lo ahanya b'uklah. But when it came to the other three, Hananya, Mishael, and Azariah, they weren't burnt at all. Inu Tulasa Anachad. So the first answer that Yeshua the Kohen Gadol says is they were three. They had three merits, but I only had one. But Abram was only one. Also, they were shy about that. Yeah, but Abram didn't have wicked people with him. I had these two wicked ones with me. Was Yair for Shuta Anura? When you don't have anybody wicked with you, the fire has no permission to start. I had wicked people with me, and there was permission from the fire to start. And I knew the Amri Inchi, this is what people say, Shrei Uda Yavishe V'chad Rativa, Uktan Yavisha Rativa. That if there are two pieces of dry wood and one wet wood, then the dry wood will ignite the wet wood. My time Yanish, but what's the real reason why Yeshua was punished there? Amar Papa Shayu Banav no sin Nashim Shena Laguna Sakuna. His children married women inappropriate for the kuna. And he didn't reject them. As it says, Yeshua Yalavush Begadim Tzoim. Joshua was wearing Begadim Tzoim, dirty garments. Is that appropriate to wear dirty garments? The married children they weren't supposed to, and he didn't object. Why, when Ruth returned from Boaz, did she say, these 6 grains of barley Boaz gave me? What does that mean, these 6 grains of barley? It means it's actually 6 grains. Is Boaz just going to give a gift, a measly gift of 6 barley berries? That's so small. On top of 93b. You want to say he gave her so much, he gave her 6 sayah. He told Shish saying, is a woman going to take 6 massive sayah? It's a tremendous amount. Ella remezla shasidin shishabanam watzeis b'shemis brachos. So what happened was Boaz hinted to Ruth that in the future she'll have 6 descendants who will each get 6 blessings. And these are the 6 descendants of Ruth who each got 6 blessings. Elohim, David, Mashiach, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. How do we know that David got 6 blessings? Because it says that when Saul needed somebody to play music for him, it says, one of the youth who were there spoke up. v'gibor chayil, v'ish milchama, v'navon davar, v'ish toar, v'Hashem imo. So that's 6. He knows how to play. He's a gibor chayil. He's a man of war. He understands the matter, and he's a man of description, and God is with him. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav Kol Pasuk Hazelo Amar Doag El B'Lashon Hara. Doag was intending for bad. He was trying to get Saul jealous. Yodan again. What does that mean? Sheyodel Lishel. He knew how to ask the proper question. Gibor. What does it mean? He's a warrior. Sheyodel Hashiv Ishmael Chama. Sheyodel Hashiv. He knew how to respond to Shiloh. Ishmael Chama. Sheyodel Lisavli Tema Melchama Tashal Torah. He knew how to engage in debate of Torah. Ishtoar, what does that mean? Shemar Panim Ba'alacha, that he was favorable in halacha. Navon Davar, Shemevin Davar Mitoch Davar. He understood, he knew how to make inferences. Hashem Imo, Shalacha Kamosa B'Kol Malcolm. He's trying to get Saul jealous. He said the law is always like David. But so Shalacha wants B'Kol Malcolm. But Kulo, Amar Lo Yonasan B'Ni Kamo. So in all these cases, Saul said, my son Jonathan is just like him. Even though Amar Lo Hashem Imo, since he said God is with him, Milsa Dibidei Nami Lo Ave, but Saul didn't have it. The law was not always like Saul. So that's why Saul got upset and became jealous. To B'Shaul Ksiv, because by Saul said B'Chol Asher Yifneh Yershia, B'David Ksiv B'Chol Asher Yifneh Yatzliach. So by Saul it said that he wasn't successful. I mean, the halacha was not like him, but by David, everything he did, the halacha was always like him. We know in the Doag, how do we know that this Echad Me'an Arim was Doag? How do we know that? So the Gemara says, means the Miyuchad Shebenarim, the special one amongst them. And it says there, Visham, it says in 1 Samuel 21:8, there was a man, one of the servants of Saul, he stopped before God, Ushmo Doag Hadami, and so there it says, Ish me'avdei Shaul b'yom stop before God, and his name was Doag the Edomite, the Avir Roim Shaul. And so we know, so that's a reference to the same thing, because he's called Avir Roim. He means he's the greatest amongst them. So we see that that's also the Miyucha ben Aram. I mean, it's a little bit tangential, but that's the proof. How do we know the Mashiach had 6 blessings? Because it says, Ruach Hashem in Isaiah, the prophecy of Isaiah, it says, Nachal of Ruach Hashem, the Spirit of God will rest upon the Messiah, Ruach Chachma, that's 2, Bina, that's 3, Ruach Eitzah, that's 4, Gvura is 5, Ruach Das, V'yiras Hashem. So that's how we get to 6. It's Chachma, Bina, Eitzah, Gevura, Das, and Yiras Hashem. Uksiv, Varicho, B'yiras Hashem. And it states they caused the Messiah to smell with the smell of God. What does that mean? What does that mean? So the Gemara offers 2 explanations. Amar Alexandria Mohammed, she itino mitzvos v'yisurin karechaim. Varicho means like a millstone, according to the first explanation. They load down the Messiah with mitzvos and afflictions like a millstone. But Rava says, the morach v'dayin, it's a special sign of that he's the Messiah, that he could smell, he could sniff out the law. He could smell it out and give a correct thought. Because it says in the verse in Isaiah, the Messiah is not going to just judge on the basis of what he sees. And he will judge the righteously the poor, and he will rebuke properly the Invei Aretz, the humble of the land. He will properly lead. So now the Gemara tells about this. Is the smell test really significant? Gemara says, Bar Koziba Melech Tartin Shanin. Bar Koziba was also known as Bar Kochba. He ruled for 2 years, Upalga, 2.5 years. Amu Rabbanan and Ana Mashiach. Bar Kochba said, I'm the Messiah. Amru Mashiach Siv, the Morach V'dayin. By the Messiah, it's written that he can sniff it out. Nechseanan, that he could smell and he knows the law. Let's see. Morach V'dayin. Let's see if you could smell out the law. Once they saw that he wasn't able to smell out the law, Katlu, so he failed the test, so they killed him. That's our version of the Gemara. The Rambam interestingly enough, in the printed Rambam, it's not there, but then the later editions of Frankel, the Frankel edition, found that this was the authoritative text, which was taken out by censors. And the Rambam writes that actually Rabbi Akiva and the elders of his generation, the great Rabbi Akiva was the greatest of his generation, and he used to carry the weapons for Bar Kokhba, and he said that this is the Mashiach, and all the generations thought Bar Kokhba was the Mashiach until he was killed as a result of the sins of the generation. And so then once he was killed, then they knew he was not the Messiah. And they did not ask from him any sign or wonder. So Rambam ignores this Gemara. So what's the reason? Because the Rambam Maspaskin, like Shmuel, says that there's no difference between the time of the Mashiach and now, meaning to say the Rambam says you don't need signs, miraculous signs to prove he's the Messiah. So therefore, the Rambam does not have this version of the Gemara. The Rav is very upset about that. So the Gemara says, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. How do we know that they're descendants of Ruth? And they had 6 blessings. Excuse me, it says, Asher ein b'hem kol mum v'tovei mareh u'maskilum b'chol chachma v'yodea das v'vine madha asher koch b'hem u'amod b'hecha u'melch u'amdam sefer u'ashon kasdim. So these are the 6 blessings. My asher ein b'hem kol mum, what does it mean? They have no blemish. Amar Rabbi Chama afil karivda de kuslita lo halibu. They didn't even have a mark from having had to take a needle for bloodletting. So what does that mean? That they held themselves back from laughter and idle conversation and from sleep. And they prevented, and when they were in the awe of the king, they held themselves back from going to the bathroom. And we know that they're from Judah because it says they're amongst them from Bnei Yehuda, Daniel, Hananiah, Yishar, so we know that they're from Yehuda. I'm a Rabbi Elazar, Kuam Bnei Yehuda. Everybody was, all these 6 were from all these 4 were from Judah. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani, Amar Daniel Bnei Yehuda, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, Mishar Shvatim. Whereas Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says, no, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah were from the other tribes. So he argues with Bryce at the beginning with the opinion that says that they were all descendants of Ruth. So it says in the verse in Isaiah, it says that Isaiah the prophet says to Chizkiah the king, who are going to spend today's daf and tomorrow's daf on, it says that he'll be punished because he showed all of his treasures to the messengers of the king of Babylon. He says, what's going to happen is your descendants who come out from you and your children, they will be brought to Nebuchadnezzar and they'll become Sarisim in the palace of Babel. What is Sarisim? My Sarisim. So Rav Amar Sarisim Amish, they're going to be castrated. Rabbi Chanina Amar Shenistar Savodazar Bimayim. Just the opposite. There's a prophecy of good, that everybody will know that there's no substance to idolatry, and it's like a saris who doesn't make any fruits, and that's why the descendants of Chizkiyahu, when Nebuchadnezzar set up the idol, they didn't bow down, and God saved them from the Kivshan Ha'esh, and that is Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Bishlam Amanda Amar makes sense according to the position that says that the idolatry became castrated or became exposed in their days as being false. I know that there was no damage to them. One says that that Chizkiah's descendants actually became castrated. Why does the pasuk say that nothing bad happened to them? So chavo denur means that the fire didn't attack them; they were already castrated. So, but it already says that in pasuk. It says that the wind of the fire didn't go in them. So Gemara says, it didn't have either one. It didn't have the fire, and also the smoke didn't bother. Makes sense going to when it says idolatry was exposed in their time. So that makes sense. Because That's why it says that they're going to guard my Shabbos. But according to the one, it says that they're actually uh, castrated. Mishtai Krab Tzadiki. Why does God have to talk about uh, um, the bad things that happen to the righteous people? Mar says, Hava ha hava bo. They had both. They were actually castrated, and also Avodah Zarah became exposed. Bishlam Amam Namar Sarisim Mamash makes sense according to one that says that they were actually castrated. I don't know if Tibbe Beisi B'chol Masai Yavashem told me Banim Banos. God says, I'll give you something better than children, an eternal name. Well, now Namar Shalem Star So Avodah Zarah B'mayam according to one that says that idolatry was exposed. My told me Banim Banos. What does it mean that I'm going to give you something better than children? You're going to have actual children. No, you had children, but they died. And my shame will maintain lo with me. I'll give you an eternal name that won't be cut off. I'm right down. That's safer Daniel. I'll give you the book of Daniel. It's called after. It's just called by your name. So now the Gemara, since we're talking about that Daniel was called the book of Daniel, Milch they call Mili de Ezra, Nehemiah ben Chakoy Amru. Since the whole book of Ezra was said by Nehemiah, most of it, then if that's the case, my time will increase. Why wasn't it called the book of Nehemiah? Why is it called the book of Ezra? Oh, because he complimented himself. It says, he said, God, remember me for good. And so since he took the credit for himself, therefore he was punished and was called the book of Ezra. David also said this, as it says in Tehillim, Zachreni Hashem b'ratzon hamecha, v'akteni b'shuasecha. Hashem should remember him for good because of all his good deeds. So David David was not talking about his good deeds, he was asking for mercy from God. Why can't you give that same answer about Nehemiah? So the commentaries discuss it. Rav Yosef Amar. Rav Yosef says, really, Nehemiah was not punished for this verse. But what's the reason why he was punished? Because he disparaged the earlier generation. That states, Pachot HaRishonim Asher V'fanayich Pidu Awa'am V'yachumeim B'lechem Yayin Achar V'kesef Shkolim Arbaim. So the leaders took from them bread, wine, and money. And the Afadaniyahu Shagadol Mimenu Siper, and he also disparaged Daniel because Daniel was there and he was insulted in this manner. When we know on the Gadol Mimenu, how do we know Daniel was greater than Nehemiah? When it says V'ra'isi ani Daniel avadiyas amaravana shemashar yuimi lo ra'u as amara avachar dagdol nafoem v'yivchu ba'hechavei. It says in the book of Daniel, Daniel saw myself the vision, and the men that were with me didn't see the vision, but they were tremendously afraid and they ran away. And who are these people who didn't see? These were the three prophets of Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi. And we know that they were greater than Nehemiah because they were prophets. And so therefore, if Daniel saw something that they didn't see, for sure he was greater than Nehemiah. Okay, so let's stop the recording here to get ready for davening in just a few minutes. A big shkoyach to everyone.